have to wait 2 minutes.
Minister of Interior. I was Deputy Minister of Interior.
Yeah, but we are minority.
I think I'm going to come back in August when it's the sun. We can start. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to this morning's very important session, EU Western Balkan Migration Management, Solidarity and Shared Commitments. I'm Hugo Brady. I'll be your moderator. I'm from the International Center for Migration Policy Development in Vienna. My CV details are not important. We have a very distinguished panel, a star special guest speaker, and without any further ado, I would like to hand over to our gracious host, Minister Spasowski, former Prime Minister and Interior Minister of North Macedonia. Minister, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Brady. Dobar dan, dobrodošli na.
Good morning and welcome to the session that is dedicated to migration flows and management of these flows. It is a pleasure to welcome you and to wish you a pleasant stay here in Struga in the Republic of North Macedonia. It is a particular honor to be opening this session, which is always a current topic in the discussions, both at a strategic and at a expert level. The topic of discussion, and there are well-argumented opinions for projects and positions for further development of the capacities. The question regarding migration policies, that is the challenges that migration brings with itself, particularly after the events of 2020 that all of us felt, 2015, that all of us felt, not only us in the region, but throughout Europe. And it will be undoubtedly, in the years ahead, one of the topics of social political agendas, because it is one of the largest challenges with which the world will tackle in the long run in the years ahead. Not only due to the reasons for that we have the majority of migrants from our neighboring countries, but also due to the fact that the regions from which this strong migration wave came, focusing on the Near and Middle East, complemented with the invasion of Russia on Ukraine, today are still far from being in an ideal, stabilized position. What is evident is the fact that the migration can only be prevented and managed if there is a strong partnership and cooperation of all European countries, no exceptions. Partnership elevates and brings to the focus the coordination, standardization that are necessary to tackle such challenges. The migration wave that caught Europe by a sweeping fell, and North Macedonia was a part of this Western Balkan route. We've been able to detect a series of weaknesses and poor preparation, not only with the countries from the region, but in general throughout Europe. And if we are to monitor these activities that were taken since 2015 to date, we can see just how poor our capacities were to tackle the situation and how we've been able to upgrade and resolve these issues in this period. In an important role in handling migration, which are a global problem, is still the coordination of activities. This is something that cannot be overseen, and nor can we even pretend to have high-quality systemic and normative solutions. And that all of gatherings of this type, be it larger ones or smaller ones, we all come to the same conclusion that a unified approach. We are talking about countries from which migrants come and to countries in which they transit and their final destinations. This is of primary importance if we wish to successfully tackle the consequences of migration. When it comes to illegal migration, due to its geographic positioning, North Macedonia is a part of the Western Balkan corridor, and it's a country of transit. For this corridor, what is typical is mixed migration movements, including refugees from origin countries that are Near East countries, Africa and Asia, as well as destination countries, speaking firstly about the member countries of the European Union. These groups are composed of vulnerable categories of persons, where we have unaccompanied children, victims of human trafficking, and persons who need international protection. International criminal networks use these mixed migration movements to smuggle migrants and victims of trafficking in humans from origin countries to destination countries. Faced with the migration crisis in 2015, without the European presence at the borders, the Ministry of Interior of North Macedonia had initiated and very successfully implemented bilateral actions through a special measure that is a joint operation that from the very onset of the crisis and up until the deployment of the personnel of Frontex, it was our indicator of success, of participation and progress towards European efforts of safely managing illegal migration. 8 countries from geographic Europe were a part of this effort, referring police officers to the Macedonian-Greek border, although they themselves were handling an inflow of illegal migrants on their own territories, at the same time tackling the COVID crisis. And for this, I honestly want to thank the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, Hungary, Slovenia, Croatia, Austria, and Serbia, for the Ministry of Interior, but also for North Macedonia as a country. It is of extreme importance to have signed the agreement with the European Union, that is with Frontex, with the Agency for European Border Guards, not only from a political aspect. This was important for us as a country, because this was the first agreement between the European Union and the Republic of North Macedonia since the initiation of the negotiations, and because it was signed in Macedonian language and it was accepted as the language of the European Union. However, for us as a ministry, it was important from an operational perspective, for us to be able to prepare ourselves to create solid operational plans and to initiate the implementation of this agreement. This will imply continuing the control of migration flows, securing external borders, and allowing us to, all of us, contribute to the national security, but also to the regional security, which has a strong input on the European security. I wish to honestly thank the European Union in this occasion and the European Commission from their support via EOM. Thanks for the director who is with us here today, for supporting us all of these years in elevating our capacities for handling migration. Mass migration of persons as a consequence of the Russian aggression against Ukraine is yet another of the series of major challenges that we faced, not only security challenges, but also health challenges, economic challenges, and energy challenges. Basically, we were going out and entering a crisis, going from one crisis to another, which was a major global challenge, I would say. Although we as a country are not directly concerned with the refugees from Ukraine, like the direct neighbors of Ukraine, however, we did undertake all measures as a country and as a government to be able to provide the fastest possible and most efficient support for each and every citizen that comes and asks for protection on the territory of the Republic of North Macedonia. A key activity on our path forward in terms of sustainable management of migration in the Western Balkans is the progress in the implementation of international and cross-border cooperation. Strengthened international trust, increased data exchange and information exchange, which is the best indicator for our preparedness to create a security atmosphere that is even more favorable than it is currently. And of course, the progress towards European integration to be faster, not only for North Macedonia, but for all countries in this region. Seeing things in a perspective chronologically, from all parties, each organization, both in European and international, sees migration as a European challenge, a challenge that requires a European response. I believe that that's the most important thing here that happened in this period, for us to be able to understand that we can't really do anything on our own, and to tackle the consequences of migration is possible only and only if we have a joint policy. And having individual policies, each for themselves, does not really bring any solid results. That is my personal opinion and my colleagues' opinion from the Ministry of Interior, that this type of cooperation is the only way forward. And only a European response to this entire challenge that we are currently facing can be the real response, including all countries that geographically and naturally belong to Europe, thus increasing the overall capacity that we as countries have in order to be able to successfully handle the consequences of migration and at the same time act humanely towards the people who are asking or seeking access to our countries. When I say European response, this entails response and cooperation with all parties, both destination countries, transit countries, and origin countries, because they are linked with each other. In the end, I would like to thank all of you. I would like to thank all of these renowned, established, high dignitaries, ministries, representatives of international and regional organizations, to thank my colleagues from the region who are here with us today, with whom we communicate and coordinate on a daily basis, to be able to improve the atmosphere for our citizens and for the entire region. And in this way, we directly contribute to the security of Europe and worldwide. And I expect to continue doing this in the future, and this will be appreciated in the future, because all of the joint efforts we are putting in and all of the challenges that we are jointly for this entire region tackling must send a strong message to the member countries of the European Union that the European Union cannot be complete without the countries from the Western Balkans. This is the only way to round up the stability and security of the entire European continent. Thank you.
Thank you especially for mentioning the 2015 crisis, because the 2015 crisis is really what has shaped all our responses in the years since we have tried to build a partnership in the widened European family. Last week in Brussels, there was a major agreement between the EU countries on migration, because they have the rhetoric that migration is a European challenge, not just a European challenge, it's a global challenge, Amy, but it needs a European response. And last week they gave the first political expression to that. The question for this morning is, what does that mean in the context of the widened European family? Who is Europe when we talk about the European response? Joining me this morning to debate that topic and to really dig down into the issues in this amazing setting here in Lake Ohrid, we have a very distinguished panel of Minister Zoran Miljanic from Montenegro, Minister Nenad Nercic, Minister for Security from Bosnia-Herzegovina. You're very welcome, Minister. We have three high-ranking officials, Ambassador Johannes Aigner, Special Envoy of Austria to the Western Balkans, Sashko Kosev from the Mari Center, which boosts regional cooperation on strategic migration issues based in Skopje. We also, from the European Commission, extremely important, we have Pavel Buziakevic from the Directorate General for Migration Management, and then, crucially, representing the voice of the marginalized, the young, but also the optimistic and very determined, we have Selfiye Mustafi. You're very welcome, Selfiye. Before all of that, however, I would like to kick off with our special guest speaker this morning, who needs no introduction from me. Miss Amy Pope is the incoming Director General of the International Organization for Migration. The Minister mentioned today the multinational mission at the North Macedonian border, in which IOM plays a crucial role. Ms. Pope has just come from a blistering campaign, which she won with some aplomb, to be the first female Director General of IOM starting from the 1st of October. That is highly significant, but it's not nearly as significant, in my view, as the special CV that she brings to that job. What has often been seen in the past as a senior diplomatic role, Ms. Pope brings an incredible mix of crisis management of the impossible problems. She has been involved at the highest levels of the US administration and the White House in tackling epidemics like Ebola, Zika. You are an expert in climate change-related disaster management. You have been a Deputy Homeland Security Advisor, and no less than Senior Migration Advisor to the President of the United States himself, Joe Biden, a great American and the greatest Irish man alive. No more prose from me, Amy, please.
Thank you very much. It is a great honor and pleasure to be here. And thank you, of course, to Minister Svasovsky, not just for your hosting of this important event, but for your leadership on the issue. You're really driving solutions that will matter for all people. And I'd like to, first of all, count myself amongst the young and the optimistic. I'm not sure if I can count as young, but definitely optimistic. Because what I see when I look at the issue of migration is actually the importance of changing the conversation a little bit, moving away from what is the challenge of migration and flipping the script so that we're talking about what are the opportunities that we can bring when we work together in harnessing the tremendous potential of human mobility. And that conversation is so important to have, even as we think about accession to the European Union, as I'll talk about. I first have to say that I'm extraordinarily grateful to the Macedonian ambassador to the United Nations. She is a Dr. Tauta Agai Tamaha, and Ambassador Agai Tamaha is so critical to me because she was a refugee herself. She fled conflict in this region. She was a young mother of two children. She's told me stories of how she had to pack the children into the car and head out to destinations that were quite unknown. And her story, her personal experience, has informed her own thinking about migration. And I know so many of you sitting in this room either have experienced something similar personally, or you know people who've experienced something similar. And what we know about the experience is that no one gets into a car with their two young children and only as many belongings as they can put into that car if they are not desperate, if they do not think that they have any other options available to them. And certainly when we think about the migrants who've been coming from places like Afghanistan or Syria, we know that what is driving those people are ultimately a belief that that is the best option, that getting on some rickety boat in the Mediterranean or setting foot on a long journey that no one knows how it will end up seems to them like their best option. And I believe that if we are going to truly manage migration, if we're truly to find the benefits of migration, we need to start from there. We need to recognize what is driving people in the first place. We need to recognize how we can work together collectively as a global community to address those drivers. And then we need to put in place policies and practices that will really allow us to benefit from what is going to be happening globally. We start first at how do we put together the policies and practices. And I'll say that you have already started this work. Right, last week, there was an action plan agreed to as part of the Skopje Declaration that creates a shared understanding, a layer of responsibilities and tasks that are very, very practical. And that is the first step. It's to bring together the various stakeholders, recognizing, as we all know, migration can never be managed by one country alone. Right, so we have to have an agreed way forward. We have to have very specific policies and plans to ensure that we ultimately get to a better outcome. And I know all of the countries in this region are part of the Global Compact on Migration. Right, the Global Compact on Migration is broad. It carries in it everything under the sun, but it also recognizes a series of actions and steps that governments and society can take working together to achieve better migration outcomes. But secondly, we need to move away from rhetoric and anecdote, and we need to move toward data-driven analysis. Now, this happens in a couple of ways. We need to use data to understand why people are leaving. We need to know where they're coming from. We need to use that evidence to come up with smart and strategic policies. But we can't stop at what's happening right now at this moment in time. We need to use the data to anticipate what will happen. Now, we can't predict every conflict that will happen. I would not have predicted that so many millions of people would be fleeing Ukraine at such a fast rate. I don't think any of us appreciated how quickly that would happen. But there are a lot of things we can predict. So start, for example, with the impact of climate change on human mobility. Right now, we know that there are more than 300 million people who live in communities that are extremely vulnerable to climate change. They do not have the resilience in place to adapt if there is successive drought, to respond if there are earthquakes like we saw in Turkey, or to have the wherewithal to manage life-threatening floods. And so we as a global community need to use the data that's available to us to understand which communities are going to be most at risk and to put in place measures that right now improve the resilience of those communities. Otherwise, we end up anticipating and will end up responding to what will be waves of people that no longer have a way to make a living at home. So again, using the data to inform our engagement and building solutions in advance of the crisis. And finally, we need to recognize that actually migration is essential. Right? We all know when we look at the European community, and I don't mean just the European Union, but the European community as a whole, that migration is actually a critical piece of why it is so powerful. When I look at the title of the conference, Widened European Family by 2030, Mission Impossible, I not only want to take out the "im" and make it Mission Possible, but replace it with Mission Critical. And there is no place where that is more true than when it comes to migration policies. Why? The European Union is facing rapidly aging populations in this century. By 2100, more than 30% of the European population will be over 65. And we know here, even in this region, that populations are declining on average by 5% a year. That means that we are very quickly getting to a place where the number of people working, innovating, bringing money in, providing money to the tax base is shrinking, and the number of people who will need to rely on those resources is growing. Now, AI solutions are not advanced enough for us to fill that gap using technology alone. The way we fill the gap is through people. It's through the exchange of skills and ideas, through the development of new policies and practices that allow us to use migration as a way to enhance development here in Europe, but also development in places around the world that do not have the resilience to withstand the range of shocks that we see today. So you think about just remittances in this region alone. Remittances of people who live abroad, and over 25% of the population in the Western Balkans live elsewhere. Those remittances are actually a driver of the economy here. And it's not just the money. It's the ideas, it's the innovation, it's the exchange of skills. It is the almost intangibles that allow a community to develop and to grasp the new ideas and drive solutions into the future. And so when I think about the importance of migration, I look at the Western Balkans and I see possibility. I see a population where people not only have the skills, but the energy and the drive to be part of the solutions of the Europe of the future. But I also see that there's going to be a gap coming into the future, and that we collectively, as part of Europe, as part of the region itself, need to start to think proactively about how do you all, as the leaders, anticipate and respond and build solutions that are going to allow migration to work for you into the future. We need to leverage the private sector. We need to leverage the diaspora. We need to bring youth to the table, and I'm looking at you, because without a whole of society approach, we are just going to continue to face migration as a problem, problems at our borders, and react rather than create and rather than innovate. So ultimately, I think there are three things we need to focus on. Have a much more comprehensive approach, exchanging ideas, plans of action with member states and other partners. We need to move from crisis response to data-driven, proactive engagement policies. And we need to recognize that migration is not only a challenge, but it is an opportunity. And together, collectively, we need to create the conditions by which we can leverage the powerful opportunities that are within migration. I want to thank you all for having me as part of the conversation. I want to thank the honorable ministers and the governments of North Macedonia for driving and hosting this important conversation. And I want to recognize that as we discuss the issue today, that this is not mission impossible. It is mission possible. More importantly, it's mission critical. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amy Pope.
We need to have more offensive attitude, not only
Thank you so much, Amy, for mentioning that the widened European family is not only possible, it's necessary, critical. Thank you for also bringing us out of the mindset that migration is a problem. Seeing migration as only a problem is a big part of the problem, and we are never going to get there unless we do a mind shift. We are in the middle of an unprecedented global migration from the aspiring parts of the world to the richer parts of the world. Last year, global migration to North America and to Europe hit some of the highest records ever on level. Even in a relatively isolated place like Canada, it was twice the highest ever recorded level. In Germany, it was similar to the 2015 levels that we called a crisis then, and I remember being in the region as an advisor to President Tusk and how stressed we all were trying to get a handle on this challenge. Now I'd like to hear the perspectives from our distinguished panel, starting with Minister Miljenic. If you'd like to give us your perspective from Montenegro on what are the most pressing challenges facing the region.
Montenegro.
Vlada Crne Gore
but also,
redovno
of course,
prati
country of the
situaciju
region.
I u kontinuitetu
So
razmijenja
we need
informacije
to-
sa partnerima.
Montenegro considered in detail the internationally recognized framework related to the human rights of migrants and refugees, taking into account both the comprehensive set of binding human rights instruments and those related to them, as well as the legally non-binding standards of best practices and principles, and harmonize this area normatively in a high degree with the acquis of the European Union. On April 8th, 2022, the government of Montenegro adopted the report on the implementation of strategy on migration and reintegration of returnees in Montenegro for the period 21-25, with the action plan for 21. The implementation report for 22 was prepared, as well as the draft for the action plan for 23 and 24. We also recognize the importance of participating in key global, European, and regional initiatives and platforms, and the aim of strengthening international and regional cooperation in the field of migration. Montenegro thus supported the global agreement on migration, which is based on the principles of state sovereignty, shared responsibility, non-discrimination, human rights, and recognizes that a cooperative approach is necessary to take advantage of all the benefits of migration. We are strongly committed to further improving cooperation with agencies and networks of the European Union in the field of migration and asylum. In this sense, I emphasize that it is very important for Montenegro because it provides us opportunity to actively participate in the exchange of reliable, up-to-date, and comparable information on the asylum and migration situation, as well as in the analysis of contemporary migratory flows. The Ministry of the Interior participates and regularly contributes to the compilation of publications and other reports, which makes our migration management system increasingly visible among member states. Montenegro hosted the conference, which was organized by the Ministry of Interior of Montenegro in partnership with the European Migration Network and the Podgorica presidency of the East European Cooperation Process in a hybrid format in Podgorica on June 6, 2023, on the topic Challenges in Migration Along the Western Balkan Route. Suppression of irregular migration is a challenge for the successful management of migration policy. It is important to point out that irregular migration in Montenegro, for now, still has a transit character, and that is mostly about economic migrants. And in the previous 6 months, a significant increase in the number of registered migrants was noticed. In 2022, the Parliament of Montenegro passed the law of amendments on the law of foreigners on the proposal of a group of MPs. With these changes, for the first time, it is defined who are digital nomads, and for this category of foreigners, is made possible to apply for a temporary residence permit. One of the priorities in the work of the Ministry of the Interior when it comes to migration is the establishment of the system of the electronic identification and registration of migrants, which will enable the timely exchange of information with the countries of the region and the member states of the European Union. In order to implement the improvement of the identification and registration system in the field of migration in cooperation of the European Commission and Frontex, a detailed sustainability study was prepared that assessed the IT and communication infrastructure in order to support the process of identification and registration of mixed migration flows, with the aim of developing national capacity for the process connection data. Negotiations with Frontex to expand its jurisdictions with Albania, Kosovo, Serbia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina have been going on since February 23, and we expect its provisional implementation and final signing after we receive the consent of the European Union.
May I plead with you to be a little bit brief, because we want to hear everybody.
Zahvaljujem, gospodine moderatoru. Nadam se da me nećete prekinuti kao moga crnogorskog kolegu.
I'm so sorry.
Ali nadam se da to niste uradili namjerno. Poštovani
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you for enabling this discussion, dear Mr. Spasovsky, dear speakers. I would like to say thank you to the host, and thank you for being here, and that we are here with the colleagues from the Western Balkans, and that we have an opportunity to improve and upgrade our relationship, and also to upgrade our activities, having in mind that migration processes in the route of the Western Balkans is increased, and bigger number of the migrants that have been registered in Bosnia and Herzegovina, they are using our country as a transit to the EU, and they're trying for illegal crossing the border. The biggest pressure is in the north of the country, where it is increased number of registered illegal attempts to migrate. From the beginning of the year, we have registered increased number from the Croatia about illegal attempts to cross the border. They have accepted 2,200 migrations from Croatia, and also from Austria. We have been requested to receive and all these migrants and return them to their home countries. From the beginning of the country, we have realized around 200 voluntary return in their country of origin, and in that issue we are leaders in the region. And we have a request for removing of 10 persons from the Bosnia and Herzegovina, because our country and the unit for foreigners is taking very big attention to the treatment of those foreigners. They are taking the data, they are taking the biological, informal data, and all the possible data about the smuggling, and also different information that are related to the smuggling and migration. Biometrical data are making a big deal, because they're helping us to analyze and evaluate and foresee potential migrant threats and potential smuggling issues. Management of the migration flow, it is also the humanitarian challenge that is not only for the Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also in the other countries. So it is showed that there is still a big challenge, and there are still a big number of the migrants who want to enter the EU, and Bosnia and Herzegovina becomes very interesting route, and old Afghanistan, the countries of origin of the migrants in Bosnia and Herzegovina are Afghanistan, Cuba, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and in the following period, we have to attend and to take bigger measures for fighting the migration, and also increase the capacities for forces at the borders, especially with the Republic of Serbia, but also with the Republic of Croatia, for strengthening the capacity for moving of those migrants to EU. And all institutions within the Bosnia and Herzegovina has to face and adjust their capacities for resolving the issues about the migration, and also adjusting the procedures for dealing with the migrants. We believe that we will participate and prepare the better response to the migrant issues here, and also in the meantime we will adjust our procedures for with the EU, because that is one of our strategic goals. all the partnerships on the regional level are becoming also on the high level of the priorities regarding the issues for migration and asylum. Regarding the migrant issues that are coming to the Bosnia and Herzegovina, it is giving an opportunity to raise our capacities to respond to these questions. And all the issues about the migration and allyism within the Balkan region is pushing us toward the cooperation and coordination of our actions in all our countries. Bosnia and Herzegovina and Ministry of Interior has very good cooperation with foreign agencies, international organizations for the migrations, with the IOM, with the EU, with the UN, and all regarding organization MARI for the migrants and people with requesting the asylum. All this migration pressure that is here for several years is the request of the Syrians response, and it does cause for the balance between the security and humanitarian response. Between institutions and cooperation and coordination in responding these issues is always included in the strategic planning for the responding to these issues. And in regard to the response to the following and the next potential measures that will respond to the migrant issues are on the road, and they are preparing us to cause and to respond and to be involved in solving these issues. And regarding the procedures that are that should be following these responses are developed within all the institutions that will improve all the measures that are there by the institutions, and it will be based as well on the lessons learned from the previous migrant crisis. And as a region, we are belonging to the modern Europe, and we deserve to be recognized and become the EU members as soon as possible, because it is very important point for resolving and responding to this crisis, migration crisis, because then it will be part of the EU stability and security. And I believe that we need to cause the success, and that we will resolve this issue very much. And I have to cause that we are the very good politicians, very young, who are working toward improvement of this activity. And I have one comment, because the translation in Serbian is not working, so I believe that you should resolve this.
Did you hear? The minister has an issue. Thank you so much, Minister Nersic. That was an excellent intervention. Thank you very much, Minister Milinic. Is it okay with our officials if I change the order a little bit and go straight to you, Selfie? Because I don't want to get the, I think it's better if it works this way. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's totally okay.
So could you offer us your perspective as we now move into the more discursive element of the panel on the challenges in the region, and how we can face it together as a wider family, and not struggling against each other. Just to make one small point to the Minister, thank you so much for mentioning that enlargement, EU membership, is in many cases the best solution to migration cooperation between the EU and the Western Balkans. Selfie.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here and to take part in the Prespa Forum Dialogue as a panelist. First and foremost, I'd like to say and to emphasize how important it is the migration, especially the labor migration, and how sizable it's been for decades in North Macedonia and in the Western Balkans. And today, about 1/5 of the population born in the Western Balkans has actually moved abroad, migrated abroad, and live abroad. Generally, we always tend to speak about migration to European countries, but nowadays we see a trend of our people migrating to the Western Balkans and in Balkans countries in general as well, for better working conditions, etc. And I think that the good part of that is the created qualifications by our governments for work in the region. However, when we talk about the topic of immigration in the Balkans, I think that comes down to the demographic aging in Europe and the challenge with that. And in North Macedonia and the Western Balkans, we have nowadays a trend of labor shortage, which is another challenge. But I think that speaks loud about how much we all need to come together as a society in different groups and to see what is the potential that we have and how can we use that in order to solve that challenge. And in my perspective, and I think it's generally known that the Roma community is one of the biggest potentials that can be used for that, as the Roma community, as a matter of fact, is the youngest growing and the fastest growing community, not just here, but also in Europe. And I think that that potential, we cannot lose that easy as a country. And thus, I think that one of the most immediate priorities for our countries in the Western Balkans should be to grow the economy, but to grow the economy with the capacities that we have, and our governments to be able to create, to invest in the youth, in the marginalized communities, in order to keep the capacity here and to decrease the migration.
Thank you. Well, this goes back to something Amy pointed to as well. Our borders need to be turnstiles, not walls. And with 50 million workers needed by 2050 in Europe, we don't need walls. We need a 30-year strategy on immigration. Since she mentioned strategy, could I move over to you, Sasko, now? And since the Mare Center is a strategically focused institute or organization, in the region, to give us your perspective on what is needed.
Okay, thank you. I believe we would all agree that the migration management is a very complex issue and that there is no country in the world that can deal with this on its own. Therefore, international and regional cooperation is very important. This is also important for our region of Western Balkans, especially taking into account our experience from 2015 and increased number of migrants last year and this year. According to me, what is important for our region is that the region should make decisive step forward in order to implement and to operationalize the commitment, the political commitment given by our leaders. Even today, our distinguished ministers use this opportunity in their statements to provide support for the regional cooperation. I would also mention that such statements and declarations were given within the Berlin process, within the Brdo process. Last year in Skopje declaration was approved by the ministers, and Ms. Pope mentioned last week in Sarajevo the action plan for implementation of this declaration was adopted. So we have political will, it's clear. What we need is to go step further, but very big, as I will say, a milestone for this. And the good thing is that we don't need to invent wheel. We have EU practice. The new Pact of Migration and Asylum is there. We can use the EU practices in our region. For instance, EU has recently appointed a return coordinator. Why don't we try to think for our region? Mr. Nešić mentioned Bosnia and Herzegovina is leader in the readmission. They are the only country from the region that signed a readmission agreement with Pakistan. Why don't we think to have a regional coordinator which will take into account their experience, but also to provide support to all the countries from the region in the area of return and readmission. And of course there is space in the area of border management, fight against trafficking in human beings, asylum. I mean, it's a complex issue, and I think that it's time for the region to go further.
Thank you so much, and thank you for making that really concrete proposal, which is food for thought as a conferences talk, but afterwards we have to have things to do and to implement. So this is a great. Austria has been traditionally all in favor of coordination in the region. Has many. You have the Salzburg Forum, the Joint Cooperation Platform. All of these different things. Austria is always pushing regional cooperation. What is your perspective, Ambassador, on what the priority is now this year, seeing that we are facing record irregular flows on the route?
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be part of this distinguished panel. But first, I would like to echo what Mr. Pasowski said. The European Union does work, is not complete, without the Western Balkan countries. I think this is of primary importance. It is forcefully supported by Austria and a geopolitical objective of primary priority, which we support and pursue every day, I have to say. Second, I think we can't speak about migration without mourning the victims of the recent shipwrecking.
Absolutely, thank you.
Of the Greece coast. We even don't know how many victims, 80 are reported, but this illustrates the whole tragedy that we don't even know. Are there 200, 300, 400, some say 700 nameless people?
And they were on their way through this route, to Afghanis and Pakistanis.
To Italy, and it's true, as you said, Ms. Pope, that they left the country because of hopelessness there and despair. But here comes the big but. Europe and the European countries cannot become the countries of desire, the place of desire for all people in need and despair all over the world. It's simply impossible. And while I agree that migration can offer possibilities and opportunities, for Austria it still poses very serious challenges, as it did from 2015. With last year more than 110,000 asylum seekers is the second number per capita in the European Union. And among the four most represented countries of asylum seekers were India, for instance, and Tunisia. This has changed thanks to the change of the visa policy of Serbia, and we saw figures going down this year. But there is still a very heavy flow of migration, illegal and this sort of migration. More than 110,000 people have been apprehended this year in the Balkan region, and here this goes from Greece way up to Hungary and Croatia. And yes, as you said, for us, regional cooperation is of primary importance in various fora, and we also concretely contribute. Mr. Milan mentioned the Austrian police officers working in Montenegro and in Macedonia. We offered an additional 40 policemen for Serbia. So it means coordinating policy, but also offering concrete support and assistance on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and thank you so much for mentioning the terrible tragedy that we're hearing still more about, and would as many as 600 people fear dead. Somehow we have to put an end to this tragedy. I also understand that Austria has the highest number of unaccompanied minors at the moment in the EU, which is a truly terrifying statistic, because there's nothing more terrifying than an unaccompanied minors crisis. Pavel, you were not left to the end as the least important. You were left to the end because we all agree that the answer is more Europe and more cooperation, Europe in its widest sense. So without burdening you too much and saying that the European Commission has to give all the answers because it's all about cooperation together, what is the level of ambition for European cooperation, also here in the region?
Thank you very much, and well, first of all, thank you for inviting the Commission here and for hosting to Mr. Spasowski in this beautiful setting. Well, definitely Western Balkans are our priority partner among the third countries because it goes not only as a partnership in terms of third country partnership, but partnership which should lead to the enlargement. And going directly to your question, what should be the level of ambition? The level of ambition for us is enlargement for the whole region. Of course, there are several steps on the route, and we definitely cooperate with you all. And talking about migration, which is one of those steps exactly to reach the full process of enlargement. Well, it is to first of all thank you for continuous engagement with us on all various challenges, migratory challenges over decades, because it doesn't even start in 2015. There were other challenges before. Of course, in 2015 we saw crystallization of what had to be done, what we should have and we didn't do. And I think that we learned a little bit of some lessons from that unfortunate experience. I mean, for us, it was mentioned the pact. Surely internally we are working very much, and we will maybe have a few minutes to come back to that. But in parallel to this internal work, again, working with third partners, it's of key, because we cannot do this without countries of origin and countries of transit. For Western Balkans specifically, and also building on the experience from past summer, we have put on table the specific action plan with several pillars ranging from border management, on protection, smuggling, fighting with smuggling, working on visa alignments. And on that we are very much engaged with all of you. We work with IOM to put that all in work easier. We of course put at disposal our funds, because money is important for all what we are doing, and we are very much engaged on that front. And the main objective of that is, I think, talking about the going from crisis into more controlled situation, is sending a clear signal that in this we are all together, that we will stay together, and we will make it a more controlled environment, and not just going from crisis to crisis.
Thank you so much, Pavel, and thank you for expressing a lot in a compressed space of time. I think we all agree more resources are needed for the region, and more resources are needed in general in the EU. We don't have enough money for migration, and we still haven't managed to solve that problem, despite everybody knowing it's an issue. We have 1 minute left. I have been told by the organizers to be exceptionally strict on time. So I would like to ask, perhaps, would anyone like to make a closing comment, and also the floor to any of the ministers, if you would like to. Amy, perhaps you would have a closing thought to
I would. I mean, it's clear to me that the answer is a combination of many of the things that people have put on the table, right? It's not that Europe is the destination for all of the world's desperate people, but we have to recognize when we're making investments of time and resources and money, if we only stop the conversation at our borders, we are actually failing to address what will become an increasingly critical desperation around the world, right? So then it makes your border measures less effective. So as we look to manage a situation in a much more strategic way rather than reactive way, the engagement of all of you together, the sustained involvement of civil society, of the private sector, of the diaspora, and frankly the ongoing resources of the European Union and the political signal it sends will be critical to the success of this endeavor.
Well, I couldn't close it any better myself, so I would just like to greatly thank the distinguished ministers, our senior officials, Selfie, for your really inspiring intervention, and of course you, Amy Pope. We wish you so well in your mission at IOM. It could hardly be more important, but you have, all of us are rooting for you in every way possible. I'd like to thank the organizers, and I'd like to invite the panel now if they'd like to come down and take a family photo.